Aeronautical law?
No, attorney of law that is focused in aviation law.
Aviation. Okay, here we go. Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. Once again, you can follow us on Twitter or X. Now it's called X at Mexico Daily. That's where I send out messages, information about what's going on in Mexico in English. And of course, I have my personal X account, which is AM Salazar. Hopefully, you can follow me either at Mexico Daily or at AM Salazar. Now, I know there's been a lot of news, and sometimes I feel bad because there's these really important issues that sometimes I feel we don't address or discuss sufficiently on the show. It's simply because we run out of time, and there's just so many things that are happening in Mexico. So I want to step back and just highlight what happened in the last couple of weeks, and it has to do with decisions being made by President Manuel López Obrador in providing more and more responsibilities to the armed forces, both the Navy and Sedena, which would be, I guess, the Ministry of Defense, but basically would be the Air Force, and the Army and the National Guard. And among these responsibilities includes controlling the responsibility of making a series of very important airports in Mexico make sure that they're working. I mean, literally, they have the administrative responsibility of now 12 airports in this country. Some of them are smaller airports, some of them are important big airports. But the bottom line, this is giving the armed forces, Mexican armed forces, a new responsibility that had not been part of its but not been part of its organization or part of its responsibility in the last since I believe it was created. And a series of laws had to be passed in order for them to do this. Well, this last week, there was 3 more airports added to this list. And to talk about the impact on Mexico's aviation industry and Mexico's aviation law and the armed forces in general, joining us today, and I really appreciate him joining us, is Rodrigo Soto Morales. He's a lawyer. He's an expert on aviation law. And I know you've been following these issues very closely. Rodrigo, so just I may have misspoken. So as with these new 3 decrees that were signed by the president this week, we're now up to 12 airports in Mexico that have been given to the armed forces to administrate it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's will modify the market and the way how the connections are made through all over the country by the passengers. But it's not certain it's going to be a direct repercussion regarding good quality of the service and also fair play in the market competition. That's what's one of the questions that everybody is wondering right now.
Well, but they're going to administer the airports, which is different than the other big debate, which is this decision made by the president to create a new airline that would be literally belong to the Ministry of Defense or Sedena. So that's a different issue, which I know has raised in a lot of concerns in terms of competitivity. How is the private sector going to compete with an airline that belongs to the government? But why would the airlines be concerned about airports being administered by either the Navy or or Sedena or the Army?
Well, there's not a direct right now sign that the things will be better or will be worse. The only is if if I can say it in that way, the zoom out is the army and the armed forces is taking over and taking over more and more and more, regarding that typical civil focused activities through the administrative branch of the state. And that could be a good sign if it's going to be more security, more order, and more discipline. But it's a doubt in the air because we need also qualified personnel. We need an approach who is focused on business, because civil aviation is a business. It's important to the business. It's important to reach agreements through, the fees about the quality of the service with qualified personnel and making more connections. So in order to foster the connectivity. And in this case, when the Army and the Navy are involved in so many fronts, at the end, the strengths trend to go in a weekly development. So we need to focus in order to obtain a success in any activity that we do as a professionals and also as institutions in private and in public sector. So the doubt is in the air. Our armed forces are very well-trained people, very serious person, very professional. So that's why I'm talking about a doubt, not a judge. And I hope so that things are getting better. But at the same time, the Ministry of Transport is getting weaker and weaker in many of the traditional functions. That also shows a kind of misadministration coming from the executive power.
Right. So that's very interesting, because as they provide the armed forces more of these responsibilities, and in this is no small responsibility. I mean, administrating airports, especially some of the important airports like Mexico City Airport, the new AIFA Airport, which is in the Mexico City Valley. Even experts, those companies that have been doing this for decades have struggled in trying to administer the airport in a way that it's profitable but also functional. So what could be the worst case scenario if now that we have the armed forces, the Army and the Navy, with this responsibility of 12 airports around the country?
Well, that there's not a direct impact in growing the aviation industry. That would be the worst scenario. Not only don't achieve a growth, also corruption and institutional weakness that implies that the armed forces became more a business agency than a ministry of the government who is for defend the country and their population. And, I think in this very fundamental idea of management, even in private or public sector, it's better to coordinate than to substitute. Because if you are trying to substitute everyone, at the end, you won't achieve all the tasks. You need to coordinate and to divide the work and the tasks in order to get more and to grow more. So that's why I'm worried about these kind of decisions, because there's not the technical, financial, legal, enough studies that kind to give a more support and a more assertive approach for the projects. That's my main worry. And if there is not that, at the end, the story ends in corruptions or incapability to do the task, and that's what I'm worried.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is something that I think has been forgotten. And I think it's a huge risk. The law by which allows for the armed forces to administrate airports in Mexico was passed, I believe, a year ago, and there's a series of amparos and questions in regards to the legality of what was approved and the process by which this legislation was approved. So are we facing a possible situation that the legislation that allows the armed forces to administer airports may be found unconstitutional? Could that actually happen?
Could be, because the process to approve that set of modifications of that set of law was not respected. It was only approved for a fraction of the congressmen and senators. And in a move that the last May, I think it was the May 3rd of this year, they move and have a kind of spurious session in El Palacio Jicotencatl. So part of the set, a good proportion of the set of this law are right now under the scrutiny of the Supreme Court of Justice in order to confirm or to deny if the process that has been done in order to approve that set of reforms has accomplished with the constitutional command. So let's see what happened. But yes, there's a risk of that. Yes, certainly.
Let me ask you this, and this is my last question, and I really appreciate you joining us today. Now that the armed forces, the Army, the Air Force, the National Guard, and the Navy have all these new responsibilities, do we have any sense whether the recruiting by the armed forces in recent years has changed in order to recognize these new responsibilities? We know they've gotten more resources, a lot of resources, but are they changing their internal structures of the Navy, of the Army, and the Air Force in order to exercise these new functions in a responsible manner?
They have to. They are right now in process in order to give it, and also to recruit the personnel, civil personnel. Also, not all the personnel has to be military personnel. So this growing and that resources that you said they have, all certainly they're going to help. It's going to help them in order to start a recruit program and to offer more incentives to people to work with them, because there's not another way. They're going to start to headhunting people in order to do these industry technical requirements or financial requirements or legal requirements, because all these big projects need a lot of people working on it.
Right.
That's why I think they are right now in process. We are not talking about soilers. We are talking about qualified personnel. So this is going to be a new management approach regarding to develop these mega proyectos, we say in Spanish, no? Because it's not only these new airports, it's the Tren Maya, and that's why
refineries.
Right now, the party who is ruling needs desperately the continuity in order to accomplish all these projects. So let's see what happens.
Okay, well, Rodrigo Soto, a lawyer, expert on airline, aviation law. It's always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Ana Maria.
Thank you. We're it's very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens next year with this.
Se van a transformar porque van a contratar a muchísima gente, ¿no?
So let's go to commercial break.